I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man.
No problem.
You just marked 1 year in the Senate. Tell me your original thoughts on how that year has been and whether you were surprised by anything.
Well, first of all, I'm just privileged to be able to do this job. The fact that the citizens of Arizona trusted me and that this country gave me this opportunity. I mean, a fact is, like a person like me, coming from a background with, one mom raising 4 kids, there's a lot of things that I should have ended up doing. And statistically speaking, the fact that I ended up being, a senator for the United States for Arizona is just 1 in a million, and I'm glad that I got to do it, and it could only happen in this country. So I'm very grateful for that. It's a mixed bag in terms of when I got there. I've had some great opportunities to work with my Republican colleagues on things that really matter to Arizona and to the nation, which I'm very proud of. There are some disappointments, obviously, about some of the things that did pass. And every day I go in, just believing again, being optimistic, believing the best of this country, and willing to try again and try to work better again.
Optimism is one thing, but give us a measurable outcome that you've been able to achieve other than presenting a bill, something that the Arizonans can see.
Well, soon enough, you're going to see a big bill called Road to Home. It's a massive bill that we, with Republicans, worked on that's going to help ease the housing burden that people are dealing with right now, which is desperately hurting. And it's going to make it easier for people to rent homes. It's going to be easier for people to buy homes, manufacture homes. And that bill is actually due at the end of this month. So we're very proud of that. We're continuing to work on other areas. We're working also, obviously, on helping out in terms of the energy sector. We're dealing with everything that's happening here. And then just like the hundreds of constituent services that we work on. VA issues, tax issues, immigration issues, all these things that you have to consistently be on top of to make sure that you're servicing your community.
That's something that the American public don't typically see because all they see is the infighting and the stalling and the government shutdowns. Yep. So in your opinion, working behind the scenes, is Washington functioning as it should right now?
No, I don't think Washington is functioning as it should, because if you look at what's happening out in Arizona, people are still hurting, right? The average age of a homeowner, first-time home buyer now is nearing 40. You can't have that in this country. You certainly can't have that in Arizona. That means you're putting off people starting families, getting married. You're putting off creating wealth. And as people that I was young enough to be able to buy a house at 26 here in Arizona. A lot of people have that experience. Right now, it's nearly impossible. We're having families that are having a tough time paying for health care. The administration pushed a lot of laws that threw people off some very affordable health care. And now we're seeing them having to go out without health care, and we're also seeing a lot of hospital systems that are starting being very stressed by this. So it's not, I don't want to say the system is broken, because I always want to believe that we can make this better, but people in Arizona are hurting, and we really need to focus on trying to fix that.
One of the interesting things about your election was many Arizonans split their ticket. So they voted for you. They also voted for Donald Trump to become president, a Republican there. What did that mean to you, and how much pressure is on you to balance what's going on in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think I have a legacy that I have to continue, whether it was me, McCain, Sinema, other people, when we recognize that, yes, we're Democrats, or yes, you're Republican, or Flake is another good example. But when we go to D.C., we are the Team Arizona. And so my pressure is to deliver for Arizona. I have to understand what that means, and sometimes that means I may not align with my party. If it's to the benefit of the people of Arizona, then I'll do that. And that means that I have to, at all times, figure out how to get things done for Arizona. That means reaching across the aisle. So when it's appropriate, we're going to work with our Republican colleagues. When it's time to fight to save the priorities of Arizonans, then we're going to do that too. But every day, the first core focus is on Arizonans first.
I want to talk about immigration. About a little more than a month ago, there was an article in Bulwark that said that Arizona was going to be the next target for mass immigration sweeps. Have you been able to confirm that?
We've not been able to confirm that. We are always obviously trying to confirm that. And we do talk to local leaders. We talk to our city, municipal, and state leaders to make sure that we understand what potentially that means. We don't want to see what happened in Minnesota happen in Arizona. That was a lot of chaos. We don't want to go from the chaos that we saw at the border to the chaos in our streets. We want professional law enforcement. much like we have professional law enforcement here, our police and our state troopers, and we want any type of immigration enforcement to be professional and targeted at the criminals. Because what we saw in Minnesota was the heavy hand of law enforcement, federal law enforcement, 2,000 to 3,000 federal agents coming into an area that usually has only 600 police officers, violating people's civil rights, not listening to Fourth Amendment, which going to people's homes without warrants, and then a lot of conflict with the local community. That's not what we need. That's not what we need, and that's not how you get professional law enforcement. That's not how you get real effects on getting these bad guys out. And I hope that the President and Department of Homeland Security have learned their lesson from that. I fear they have not.
How is it a sitting member of Congress is not able to retrieve that information on a national level from the administration when you're right there?
Look, this administration has broken a lot of norms and customs that we just assumed every administration would live by. As a matter of fact, the first Trump administration did live by that, where they would tell us, hey, you don't necessarily have to listen to me, but I'm representing the taxpayers of Arizona. They have a right to know how their money is being spent. They didn't even give us a heads up they were buying a warehouse in Surprise that was worth more than, I think it was spent close to $70 million, $50 million, something like that. They did not talk to me. They did not talk to the members of Congress in that area. They didn't talk to the local mayor and give him a heads up. This is the kind of stuff you usually give a heads up to because you want to have a good working relationship. And again, Arizona, unlike other states, is willing to be helpful in getting out real criminals. We are not a sanctuary state, or we don't have any sanctuary cities, so that we don't quite understand why there is this kind of antagonistic relationship that they're having with our localities here.
So to that warehouse, I asked directly to Secretary Nome a few weeks ago. I asked her about that facility. She was pretty vague in her response, and then I specifically asked her about the 1,500 beds that were supposed to go into that place. She then referred to it as the detention center. Have you been able to get more information beyond that?
What you received is what we received. We know that it's going to be around 1,500 detention beds. It's going to supposedly hold people for a couple days. We don't know if that's true because we've seen other places they're holding people for longer than that. And more importantly, on the local impact, that area is not meant for that. I disagree with the policy of even having that type of mass deportation, but also the fact that the local community had no impact, had no say in this whatsoever. The amount of resources it's going to drain from the area, from the police presence it's going to require. They should have at least had some respect for the locality there and talk to them. Maybe you don't have to talk to us because if you want to be partisan, that's why. But that area deserves to have some type of information sharing, and they're not getting it whatsoever.
And when you talk about reaching across the aisle and working with some of your Republican colleagues, how are these conversations not going on, or do they not know either?
A lot of times they do not know. So for example, my colleague from Mississippi did not know that they were opening up a site in Mississippi. Have another colleague from West Virginia that didn't know they were going to happen. They were just kind of announced. They bought the land and then that was it. So there is, a lot of times there is not coordination from the top. And again, the real coordination has to be with the voter, the everyday Arizonan. This is their money. This is their taxpayer money that's being used. They should know how it's being used and what the process is and decision-making process around it.
And when you talk about the funding, and these are conservative estimates, because again, there's no transparency and people aren't getting the information. But you're still talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being spent for these immigration enforcement campaigns in Los Angeles, Minnesota, Chicago. Are people getting so-called bang for their buck in what they're seeing when they signed up to have the most abusive criminals be taken out of the country?
So from my conversations, and look, again, like you brought up, I won a state that Trump won. When I was going door to door and talking to voters and going all over the state, what people wanted was the deportation of criminals. They want to make communities safer, and they want to shut down the border. And to give credit to the president, the border is shut down. We have the most secure border in the history of the country, or at least in recent memory, where we have the least amount of border crossings. What they didn't want, though, is the chaos we have right now. They didn't want families being separated. They didn't want people that are here illegally, but have largely have kept themselves clean, have U.S. citizens, have connection to the community. But we don't know how they make their targeting decisions. We don't know how much they're spending per person. We don't know who's getting contracts and how they're getting contracts. There's a lot of decisions that are being made that could potentially be rife with grift and corruption, because they're making these decisions and not sharing it with the public, and certainly not sharing with the people that have oversight, which is us. We estimate that, for example, with all the detention centers all across the country, once they're fully built, invested in terms of upgrades, and then staffed, it will be close to $35 billion for that. That is a lot of money. ICE right now has more money than the United States Marine Corps has, right? There's a reason why this needs to be reined in, because there's so much money with very little oversight, something that we should always try to avoid in government.
So help me understand how there is no oversight. I mean, obviously the government, the way it's built, there's supposed to be checks and balances.
Yes.
So how are all these decisions, especially in these warehouses that are popping up across the country, how is there no oversight, and how are they not getting approval and still moving forward?
So a lot of what we thought was by law, by mandate, as U.S. citizens, were really the norms that governments used to fit, right? What happens with this administration is they come up with a reason why they can't do it. They know that there is no check on the House or on the Senate side, and they know the Supreme Court largely land with them or take enough time that they could just keep whatever abuse they're conducting themselves in right now. So it really is incumbent upon the one branch, which is the legislative branch, to actually have a quick check on it. We are getting Republicans to come and join us more on this. We had a really good hearing 2 weeks ago where Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky joined with us, and a couple other senators joined with us to talk and to I would say scold ICE about their conduct, specifically in Minnesota, and how they treated U.S. citizens, and how their escalation of force. From my experience, I also talked and got the directors to agree that what they saw was not professional, and that they need to condemn separately. So there is some effort there, but we need to have a real alliance with our Republicans, that this is not a Democrat-Republican thing. This is a accountability issue. If ICE and these big government organizations feel that there's no accountability, they're going to continue their abuses, and unfortunately, we're going to have some of the instances we saw in Minnesota where 2 Americans were killed in less than 2.5 weeks.
Let me ask you about the way the ICE has been moving through city after city. Any regret in co-sponsoring the Laken-Riley Act that you co-sponsored that allowed ICE to operate as some of what we're seeing play out here?
Well, what ICE is doing right now is not at all related to Laken-Riley. I mean, they're going after everybody. About 85%, I think, from the last thing we saw were people that had no criminal history whatsoever. The amount of money that they're getting, which I voted against, was also for a separate funding bill, one of the reconciliation bill, something that we're trying to pare down now and actually to restrict. The majority of this country is in agreement, right? People with criminal history, people that are dangerous to the community, should be detained, and after they have had their time in court and determined that they're found guilty, then they should be deported. That's what Laken-Riley was about. What this is happening right now is beyond that. These ICE agents, these federal law enforcement that are being empowered by ICE and Homeland Security are ignoring all the norms. They're ignoring all the rules. They're not giving people due process. They're not giving people the opportunity to defend themselves, and they're deporting people willy-nilly without any actual plan. I mean, right now there's a quota the DHS has to hit on a daily quota, which is causing all this, right? The amount of the fact that they're allowed to racially profile because of Judge Kavanaugh's opinion. These things are all like augmenting to what you're seeing right now with the pure chaos that is being caused in places like Los Angeles, Minnesota, and potentially other places soon. You
had an interesting exchange the other day on committee regarding some of the policies that are being violated by ICE agents out there in Minnesota. For those who didn't see this and aren't familiar, you asked some specific questions
Yeah.
regarding use of weapons.
Yes.
What were you told when you asked about the way these weapons were being used? Some using the butts of guns to hit individuals.
So for background, the reason I asked about this, and everyone else was asking a lot of other questions, I asked about this because, like, from my personal experience as a Marine, being trained in riot control and interactions with public, and being in very hard situations. I had a very hard tour of duty in Iraq where, you know, we had to interact a lot with some very hostile people. We also learned how to be in cities surrounded by Iraqis and figure out how to accomplish our mission, be professional about it, and at the same time keep the civilian population, you know, at least, you know, moderately, you know, neutral, so they wouldn't come out against us, right? The way that I saw what was happening in Minnesota, it reminded me of some of the occupations that I was involved in. That's not how you should be treating American citizens. And also the skill and the professionalism I saw of 18, 19-year-old boys in the middle of a war zone, how they treated civilians, even after being in such a hard situation, yet people used to spit at us, people used to do really horrible things at us, we just saw horrible things happen, and yet every day they would go out and be professional the whole time. And the fact that I saw, you know, certain ICE agents and Border Patrol agents acting the way they did towards U.S. citizens, whether it was Ms. Good being shot by a police officer who was using a camera phone and having a gun at the same time, which would never be allowed in any type of police force, or the agents that killed you know, Mr. Petrie, who you know, was at that point not resisting and had 6 people jumping him at the same time, creating chaos to the situation that led to something like that. It made me question what kind of command structure allowed this to happen. What gave them the indication that they could do this? If you even see what happens before many of these situations, there's an escalation of force where you have, you know, some of these agents pepper spraying people's in the face for them just videotaping, exercising their First Amendment rights, and they're pepper spraying them. I've been pepper sprayed as part of my training in the United States Marine Corps. It is hard. It blinds you. It will fill you with rage. And they're going around and doing that to U.S. citizens. I want to know what kind of command element allowed that to go. What makes these men think that they could do that without having any consequences? Who told them that they could use the butt of their pistol to hit somebody? Because that's very dangerous, first of all, not just to the person you're assaulting, but even to your fellow agents, because they're around you, right? And you see it on camera all the time that happens. So, you know, for me, it was important for them to understand that I'm watching, that I understand what is doing now. It's not professional law enforcement. And the way to actually stop this is to have accountability. That's why when you have, you know, in our cities, you know, when you have, like, for example, in Arizona, professional law enforcement, you don't see them using their pistols to pistol whip somebody, because they know it's bad training, it's illegal also, but also it puts everyone in general, and they'll have accountability. That's not what you have in ICE right now. And the training cycle is even more dangerous.
And when they talked about the training, they went from 70-some days to 40-something and immediately put them on the street.
With weapons, too.
Yeah, so now that they've, in front of a committee, explained that there isn't proper procedure,
right.
There's no accountability after some of those violations. From your standpoint, what do you do to make sure this doesn't happen moving forward?
Well, this is one of the things, again, that we're working and trying to push this administration, right? So right now, the administration came back and has asked for, I think, a total of another close to $45 billion for DHS, ICE, and CBP. What we're saying is, if you want that money, we need to see reforms, right? You can't be going after people invalidating their Fourth Amendment rights. You shouldn't be racially profiling. You know, you need to have real proper training. You should be targeting the proper people. You should work with local communities. All these things that we believe and the American public wants. We want professional law enforcement, what people are expecting. It's not what we're getting right now. Giving them more money while they're abusing the process and abusing the money they have already is not really me fulfilling my fiduciary duty to the voter. Like, come in, compromise with us. Let's get this in a way that is aligned with where the American public wants, which is, let's target the criminals. Let's get people their Fourth Amendment rights. We understand people are going to get deported. That's the nature of having a country as ours that has borders, and there's some people that will get deported. But let's do it in the way that we saw, in a professional way that we saw under Obama, under Biden, and under Bush in the past.
And this is where the partial government shutdown is currently.
Correct.
You guys agreed to fund DHS for 2 more weeks in
Yes.
hopes of a negotiation. Where did those negotiations break down, and what are some of the sticking points that they don't seem to want to compromise?
So the negotiations went down because the counter proposal from the president's office was just non-existent. For example, on the issue of warrants, he should have a warrant. This is the basic constitutional right that we have as this country, that you should not be able to have an agent entering your house without a warrant. Number 2, we need to figure out the use of force. Again, you should not be able to escalate forces. You use escalatory force against civilians. Border Patrol should not be outside of a certain zone within our borders. Use some masks. Except for special occasions, you should not be masked, because you're only creating a very harsh relationship between law enforcement and civilian. None of our police forces in Arizona are masked ever while they're conducting everyday policing. We're asking for them to stop their suppression of cities. If you want to do target enforcement, do target enforcement. What I saw in Chicago, what I saw in Los Angeles, I saw in Minnesota, was an effort to use immigration enforcement to target civilians in general, to create an atmosphere of fear, versus actually trying to do professional law enforcement and immigration enforcement.
Caught in the middle of all this, 250 plus employees within DHS. What would you tell them as far as what's happening right now, where some of them in a few weeks won't receive their paychecks?
Yep.
What would you tell them in order to push forward with what you're trying to achieve versus their paycheck?
Look, I think it's very simple. The solution is very simple. TSA, FEMA, and the areas that are not involved right now in terms of enforcement, ICE and CBP, for example, we should carve them up. We should pay them and allow them to have the funding they need to operate on a normal basis. I think everyone agrees with that. We don't want this to be politicized. FEMA is already politicized. As you know, Arizona is still waiting for money for Gila County and Mojave County for floods that normally we would have received for our flood mitigation. And these counties that are poorer than other counties are not receiving that money. But I don't want to engage in that. If we can allow them to move forward, we'll continue negotiating on this other side. There's no reason that we all lump them in together. But right now, ICE and CBP has a lot of money, $175 billion, unrestricted money that's coming in from previous budgets. They're not going to be going broke anytime soon. They can easily operate without any more appropriations this year for their goals, as much as I may disagree with it. But things like TSA, FEMA, and other entities like that, we do need to go and fund them to continue having their operations go forward.
What I'm hearing is a lot of lack of transparency, a lot of lack of cooperation. From you as a sitting congressman, are you doing everything you can from a standpoint of trying to hold them accountable for some of that transparency and accountability?
I think I've been trying to meet the moment, and this is the basically last straw that I can actually continue doing. This is why I'm not voting to fund them more, because I don't have the accountability, I don't have the transparency. I go to the different detention camps and prisons to make sure that we're checking in. From my experience so far, they've largely been accommodating when we've gone there. But when we try to get other information from individuals, it does become more difficult. But in general, right now, we don't have what the American taxpayer needs, not what I need, what the American taxpayer needs. Transparency about what their mission is, how the money is being spent, how they're deciding who gets to spend that money. And this is why we're putting ourselves in this situation to make sure that we have an opportunity to negotiate a good outcome for the American public, because we're not getting it right now.
I want to ask you about the SAVE Act, because Secretary Noem, of all people from DHS, came here last week pushing the SAVE Act. What is your understanding of the SAVE Act, and why last-minute push when we have midterms only months away?
Look, that's exactly it. From what I see is this is an effort to help the president win a very unpopular election that's coming up. We have voter ID in Arizona. And I actually think our voter ID in Arizona is tilted the correct way. You have multiple opportunities to prove who you are. If you can't prove yourself that day, you could come back with take a provisional. You could come back with the paperwork you need and you prove it. We have vote by mail, which is used by 80% of Arizonans. People sign up and they want to get their vote by mail, and they are sure to get the vote by mail every year. The SAVE Act, in addition to just voter registration, by the way, is going to make it so every year you have to request a ballot. And when you request that ballot, you're going to have to take a photocopy of your driver's license and put it into the vote by mail and then send it in. That's going to be disruptive to so many people. There's a lot of people that don't like sending stuff like that through the mail, by the way. And we know that there is no history of mass voter fraud, right? Even right now, we've had some instances coming up, and all we know is that over probably decades, there's been 60-ish people around that have registered to vote. We don't know how many actually have voted, and the program they use to actually check ends up having a lot of false negatives. What we do know, if you do this though, you're going to end up disenfranchising thousands and thousands of Arizonans for something that is not happening, and it's this close to an election. If you look at the SAVE Act, they actually have even worse aspects to it. Women that have gotten married and changed their last name, like my wife did, they're going to have to go back and reproof themselves. Now, what does that mean? Well, this also has a process where they'll purge people, but there is no actual process they've outlined that will help women re-register to vote. They've just said that you're going to have to do it, but there's no actual process to do that. So it won't just be you bringing in your marriage certificate. There needs to be something else, and they haven't actually issued the rules to that. It is now February. People are going to start voting for the general election in early September. We don't have the time to be able to do it. The only reason they're rushing this right now is because they want to get the right voters in, not necessarily get the voters that should be voting.
Are systems in place in case this is passed? And on the other hand, President Donald Trump is saying if it isn't passed, he will issue an executive order. So behind the scenes, our systems already being put out there, discussed, ready to take place if this moves forward?
We just don't know. The SAVE Act is very unclear in certain areas. Like once you get kicked off the voter rolls, if because part of this is that you have to send, the state has to send all their voter rolls to the federal government. The federal government is going to then scrub the list and send back to the state saying these are the people that are illegally registered and they must get kicked off. There is no actual process they've outlined how to actually fix that. So again, the scenario when it comes to potentially thousands of women that are married in Arizona is if this happens, they get kicked off, they still haven't outlined how you actually adjudicate that. So even though there's going to be plenty of women that are going to go get all the paperwork, they're ready to go, they'll have their marriage certificate, they'll have their real ID, they'll have potentially a passport. There's nothing that actually says in law how this actually gets fixed. So they're rushing to this, is the problem. They're rushing to get this on. They're going to disenfranchise potentially thousands of Americans and thousands of Arizonans, or we're going to end up in litigation that's unnecessary, all because they want to be able to potentially alter the outcome of an election in November. That's not how you do this. There's good discussions to be had. I think we could talk about how to reinforce our election process. Again, I think Arizona actually has a really good one. It is a mandatory ID state. I'm fine with that because you get so many chances to prove yourself. But what they're doing right now is designed to make sure less people vote, not to secure the vote.